Welcome to Ghat, Kjetil.
Happy to be with you again.
It's my pleasure. I don't think I need to introduce you to my viewers. I think everyone will know you, but for the avoidance of doubt, you are a professor at Oslo New University College, a professor of peace and conflict studies, and you have written and researched about the Horn of Africa in general, and Ethiopia and Eritrea in particular. And I invited you on today to help us make sense of the new developments in Ethiopia and Eritrea with the new alliances. I think a lot of people are confused about new developments, about things happening that only 2 or 3 years ago people wouldn't have imagined were possible. And there is no better person to take us through what is happening in Ethiopia and Eritrea. And thank you for your time, Kjetil. Maybe we could start with the speech that the Eritrean president gave on Independence Day, where he took the opportunity to rip into Ethiopia. I didn't say anything about Eritrea really, but about Ethiopia. And if there was any doubt that the relationship between Ethiopia and Eritrea was broken beyond repair, that was that. And what did you make of that?
Yeah, it contained a lot of his usual babble, so to say, his kind of meandering, partly inconsistent and contradictory remarks about general development, geopolitical developments, global developments. He also have the usual kind of externalizing all of Eritrea's troubles and challenges, not taking any responsibility himself, who have governed the country since 1991, more or less solely. It's everyone's else blame that Eritrea is in the dire straits they are. But as you said, it was the noteworthy part where he pointed at the very deteriorating relations with the Ethiopian government as such, both explicitly and in between the lines, so to say. It came clearly forward that the so-called earlier alliance between Abiy and Isaias is definitely broken, and that he is possibly looking around for new partners to counter a perceived or real threat from Ethiopia, new partners in the region or possibly inside Ethiopia itself, in order to stem off Abiy Ahmed's interests or the Ethiopian government's interests to the Red Sea or to Eritrean territory as such. So it is, interpreting Isaias' work, his speeches, is like the old criminology discipline, so to say, when we try to understand what the old former communist leaders of Soviet Union were trying to say during these official holidays they were marking. And it's kind of like that too with Isaias. But I think this one was rather explicitly phrased, and it should be looked upon as a warning. It should be looked upon as a foreboding for something to come.
You say that he's trying to create new friends, new allies. And of course, one of the new friends he's trying to attract is, by the look of things, the TPLF. It looks like at least a faction of the TPLF is trying to work in cahoots with him. And apparently there have been some communications between the TPLF and the Eritrean regime. And this is something that has struck Tigrayan observers and Tigrayan politicians and commentators as something very strange, as something very bizarre, that they would try to seek alliances with someone who committed the most atrocious crimes. What do you think about that alliance?
First of all, I must say that it is nothing bizarre in it. This is the Abyssinian game, as I usually call it, that the political elites of this era, Ethiopia and Eritrea, particularly the highland elites, that they have consistently, for the past several hundreds of years, always aligned and realigned and redefined alliances according to what they perceive as the immediate biggest threat to their own power, or according to their own ambitions, to climb in the hierarchy of the feudal system. And the feudal system, politically, in a political sense, is still existing in the Horn of Africa. Currently, it is Abiy Ahmed who are the Negus Negast who holds the palace. And of course, the various races and nobilities across the country are then plotting to see how they can manage to get the upper hand and possibly be the next Negus in the palace. This is, nevertheless, the wars which have been fought yesterday. That doesn't matter when they look forward to try to climb the political hierarchy and to try to defend your position or to acclaim a bigger, more prominent position. So it is only natural when Isaias Afwerki today are reinterpreting Addis Ababa and reinterpreting his alliance with Abiy Ahmed from ally to enemy. He needs also to realign his the landscape surrounding Abiy Ahmed and the palace, meaning that former enemies might turn into allies. I wrote a book about this based on the 1998-2000 war and how it played out at that time when EPLF and TPLF went from partners to enemies over the night, and TPLF and Amhara Ethiopian nationalists turned from enemies to friends overnight. And this is what's happening again now, in the sense that Isaias is looking around for partners to align with in order to fight Arat Kilo. And, you might also, we're talking about interpreting the speech of Isaias Afwerki on the 24th of May. Well, let's have a look at Debretsion Gebremichael's speech of 28th of May, just 4 days later on Ginbot 20, where he explicitly states that Eritrean and Tigrayan people are friends and allies, and he wishes all the best for Eritrea and congratulates Eritrea with its celebration of independence. Of course, also mentioning the genocidal war, but not explicitly blaming that on Eritrea. He leaves that unattached, so to say, and that we need to settle kind of the history. But Debretsion is also very much forward-looking in that speech, possibly hinting at a realignment as seen from Tigray. Because also, the realignment is not only happening from Asmara, it's happening from Mekele, as you say, it's happening from several of the power centers in Ethiopia. And as seen from Mekele now, or from the TPLF, let's use that term, the TPLF Debretsion, is that, Abiy is really having a chokehold on Tigray still, 2.5 years after the Pretoria Agreement. Abiy has not helped in easing the humanitarian situation at the level needed. He has not accepted the return of territories. He has not facilitated the return of IDPs. All these very, very crucial elements in the Pretoria Agreement, Abiy has left unattended. And this is, this rests on the federal government to protect and to implement. Mekele cannot do that if not the backing of Addis. So, you see that TPLF Debretsion also need possibly to realign and to think about alliances to protect their own interest as they see it, where Addis Ababa not necessarily is the key friendly alliance. He needs other alliances to stem off the trouble emanating from Addis. So it is changing on the row of power centers, so to say. Of course, the Fano and Amhara rebellion, the Fano leadership, which you also see, we maybe want to talk about a bit more about that later, but you see a more coordinated leadership of the Fano struggle, where they might fall into place and align with what you see happening in the north. Again, this is everybody who knows Ethiopian history and the history of this geographical area doesn't see anything bizarre in it, doesn't see anything new in it. It just follows a pattern which we have seen for, as long as we can interpret and read Ethiopian history.
Well, you started by saying that there is nothing bizarre about this, and I understand why you would say that. I think at least two things that people find bizarre is one, that a dictator of a tiny, poor country should be in a position of pulling the strings. You have Ethiopia, a big country, relatively richer and relatively more powerful, and you have Eritrea, and you would normally expect Ethiopian politicians should be in the position that Isaias is in today, but it is the other way around. And I think many people psychologically struggle to come to terms with that. So that is the first one. And from Tigray's...
Before you take the second one, because I need to contextualize my position here. I view that it is not bizarre is a view from the political elites in the area. Of course, it is bizarre as viewed from the grassroots, from the people suffering, from the people struggling. It is bizarre viewed from conventional international relations and politics. It's bizarre from humanitarian aspects and perspectives. It's bizarre from a range of positions. But I view it as part of the local political game playing out. Then it is not bizarre. And hence it should not be a surprise to any analysts viewing the situation on the ground. Just to make that clear, yeah?
Yeah, it's a good point. And you mentioned that Debrecen as well is making some overtures to Isaias. He's trying to make amends, if we can put it that way. And I think one aspect of that many people find offensive and difficult to understand is that why would the TPLF think any significant support could come from Eritrea? Because like I said before, Eritrea is poor, even militarily. I don't think it's very, very strong. So why would the TPLF go way out of their way to create alliances with Eritrea to defend themselves or Tigray?
Well,
why would they think?
I can very well understand that from a local Tigrayan perspective, meaning not the elite, but ordinary people in Tigray, this might seem extremely provocative and extremely bizarre, to use that term again, in the sense that, warming up to Asmara, when it's only 2.5 years ago, Eritrean soldiers, on orders of Isaias, were killing and raping and pillaging Tigray. That is strange. But viewed from the political elite and from the center, it might be more rational. And what has Eritrea to offer? Well, Eritrea has a port to offer for Tigray. Eritrea has import and export, which Tigray needs. Very much more convenient than anything Ethiopia can provide. And Massawa is only, some couple of 3-4 hours away from Tigray. And Tigray is in desperate need of import of everything from humanitarian, medical, engineering, supplies to other equipment and goods. And Tigray are also in need to export some of its material, particularly maybe some of the minerals you are exploiting in Tigray. So in that purely transactional sector, Eritrea has a lot to offer to Tigray. And of course, the Tigrayan political elite needs to think about that. What can best accommodate the need of overpopulation? Purely pragmatically. That is a fair point to address without attaching any other political significance to it. Then, of course, you can speculate what goes beyond that. And what kind of political visions might this involve? What kind of future are we seeing here if it is a closer collaboration between Asmara and Mekele? Does that signify anything else in terms of geopolitical strategic realignment? And when you see a more weakened center in Ethiopia, much more weakened control of the Ethiopian territory by the central government, that might open up for other perspectives and other visions for a future Tigray.
Well, I think that's an interesting point, Kjetil, but I think you are assuming that the TPLF or at least potentially assuming that the TPLF is pursuing or advancing Tigrayan interests. But I think there are many people in Tigrayan circles who would take leave to doubt that. They are more cynical. They say that, for the TPLF it's an act of self-preservation, that they are in the slightest uninterested in interests. They say that, and then, for good reason, they also point out to the fact that Isaias is not something that you could trust. When the winter finally comes, he's going to let you down. He's going to betray you. So for these reasons, people struggle to buy the argument that the TPLF might actually be trying to create an alliance that might be useful for Tigray, especially if Abiy decides to come after Tigray, which he might. So there is that.
Certainly. Let me just address those two key points. Again, I spoke from an analytical viewpoint, and I said that there is something to gain transactionally. That doesn't mean that I think that is the intention of TPLF. I just purely analytically said it. I can agree that so far, and again, interpreting the history of TPLF stretching back to 75, yes, they have gone through leadership crisis several times, and seeing how they have acted earlier, reflects again how they act today, possibly, in the sense of preserving power in the hands of the people who believe they are supposed to control the party. The vanguardism, the vanguard thinking, is still very much embedded in TPLF, in my view, that they believe, as Marxist-Leninist League of Tigray, MLLT, was designed to do, is that it is an inner core, it is an elite within the party, and the party itself is an elite within Tigray, but that inner elite are the one bestowed with authority to really take care of the party, and hence then to take care of Tigray. And no one else should be allowed to interfere in what that inner elite thinks or does do. I think that kind of vanguardism is still very much present in the way the elite of TPLF are thinking. And that was played out during the power struggle between Getacheo's fraction and the Debretsion fraction, to very much simplify it. And again, you can call it the old system elite prevailed in that power struggle. And the challengers, they were defeated and hence pulled out, and they have reorganized themselves in another platform. That has happened earlier too. And most usually, it is the old system elite which have prevailed. The closest we get to a takeover by a new kind of younger elite was in a 2001 dissent process, which almost managed to topple Meles. And again, Getachew almost managed to kick out Debretsion last year, which was stopped by the TDF generals. So it is, I'm not saying history repeats itself, but it is a pattern. Surely we can interpret it, TPLF's leadership, the way they behave. And I agree that there is also an interpretation that they're doing this just for self-preservation. I'm not taking any stand on that. I'm just analyzing it. It's up to the Tigrayan people to decide what they believe on that or not. I see there are purely pragmatical, transactional, strategic interests in what they might be doing to align with Asmara. Yes, there are also possibly purely pragmatical self-preservation interests in what they're doing. Be that as it may, we have to keep all these issues in our analytical frames. But your second point, I 100% agree with you that Isaias has never been a trustworthy partner. Everybody who has done any deals with Isaias knows that tomorrow he might backstab you on that. But again, who is a trusted partner in Ethiopia or the Horn of Africa? Mention one of them. Mention one. There are no trusted partners here. There are no long-term or lifelong relationship in the Horn of Africa. It's purely played out according to this playbook, as we have seen unfolding also today.
So you mentioned strategic thinking from the. You say that there might be some strategic calculation from the point of view of the TPLF, and of course there will surely be strategic calculation from the point of view of Isaias. And one question that many Tigrayans are talking about or asking is, what might Isaias be asking in return from the TPLF? And one of the things that he might be asking is something that you briefly alluded to. He might be telling the TPLF that they should come out in public and say that Eritrea hasn't committed genocide and that Eritrea hasn't committed serious crimes. And that is why, like you said, Debrecen is erasing sometimes watering down the crimes committed by Eritrea. That is an attempt to make it palatable for Tigrayans that it is all right to create alliances with Eritrea. And in the process, what is happening is that history is being erased. I think that is one concern that many Tigrayans have. I don't know if you want to reflect on that.
I think that's a very good point. And you see the same kind of reframing of history from Abiy Ahmed, and that he is trying to hide the atrocities committed by ENDF and push the blame on the Eritrean troops, according to his speech earlier this year. Yeah, and obviously it is the Tigrayan leadership, whoever that is, who might hold the judgment on this. Sadly enough, the Tigrayan people, the ordinary people, the victims, I'm very sorry to say, and it really, really saddens me, I don't believe their grievances, their interest in justice and accountability will be met. And that is very hard to say, but I think that's the reality. Accountability and justice will not be meted out to the people who did tremendous atrocities against the Tigrayan people. So then, the so-called, processes put in place on transitional justice put in place by Addis Ababa is just nonsense in this regard. So then it will be very important for the formal records, for the formal history. Formal history is written by the power holders. What will the authorities, the political authorities in Tigray say? Who will they blame as the main culprit on the Tigrayan genocide? And in a way then, today, it is TPLF Debrecen who holds the key to that. If he will point his fingers to Addis and say that, it was the ENDF who really did most of the atrocious genocidal warfare against us. Yes, the Eritreans were there, but, they were not really that deep into Tigray or whatever, excuse. Well, that will be the narrative which we will remember. If he says the opposite, it was the Eritrean troops who really committed genocide on us, and the ENDF was there not doing so much damage. That will also create a narrative. In my view, both sides are to blame for the genocide. Both sides should be held accountable, both the ENDF and the Eritrean forces. But that will never happen. It might be one of them. That depends on the war to come. Who will get the blame? Yeah? History will be written on this after the next war.
Yeah, the sad reality that history is generally written by the victors, right? But you say who would the Tigrayan politicians blame the genocide on? And the fear and the signs are that they are going to belittle the whole thing, that they are going to say genocide was, although they might not explicitly say, if you connect the dots of what they are doing, the implication is that they want to pretend that nothing, no serious crime has been committed on Tigray. That seems to be the direction they want to go in exchange for creating some sort of alliances that might work or not work eventually. But if we could dwell on this, Kjetil, so that was from the Debrecen faction's point of view. But then there is the other faction, the Getachew faction. And that faction is doing exactly the same thing, but with Abiy. And if you listen to Getachew now, he doesn't say anything negative about what the Ethiopian forces committed in Tigray. He doesn't say anything negative about Abiy Ahmed. Actually, if you listen to Getachew, you would get the impression that Abiy was on Tigray's side during the genocide. That is the impression you get. The TPLF is split down the middle, and one faction is completely with Abiy, and the other faction is completely with Isaias And both Isaias and Abiy are exploiting each one of them. And the Tigrayan public watches on and wonders why. Why are they doing this? What is to be gained from this? Why this sad spectacle? So that is the big question among Tigrayan observers.
And I can very well understand that. I would not say one side is completely with Addis and the other side is completely with Asmara. I think they are not completely there, but they are gravitating towards these two bigger power centers. Again, out of a necessity, if they have an interest to continue to play the game, if they have an interest to continue to be a political elite of relevance, they have to align with other, preferably stronger political elites of relevance in order to elevate themselves. So Getachew, when he left Mekele and stepped down, or were asked to relieve his duties as interim president, he, from a political analytical viewpoint, he didn't have that many options. Yes, he could retire from politics, surely, and possibly, if he asked Abiy would possibly give him some ambassadorships, maybe to Norway or Scandinavia for that matter. He would be welcomed here, certainly, and he is out of politics. That might have been one strategy, or going back to the university as a law professor, something like that, civilian life. He could have established his opposition party as independent opposition party in Tigray, and that would fare with him as with the other opposition parties in Tigray. They are just nominal in strength. They don't have any strength on the ground because they are pushed around by the big power or marginalized by the big power. And then his third option would be then, well, in order to continue to have a prominence, in order to continue to have a relevance, in order to be somehow strong, I need to find a big brother who will back me up. Who are that? Well, Isaias is already the big brother of TPLF Debretsion. So I need the other guy, Abiy. And he chose that. Again, from a political pragmatic viewpoint, fully understandable. Does it resonance with the Tigrayan constituency? I don't think so either. I don't think so, because he is allying with another genocider. So both the two political elites in Tigray, if you can call Getachew's fraction a political elite, and I think we should, are aligning with what were the mortal enemies of the Tigrayan people yesterday. There you see how quickly things change. And how, again, bizarre it is in every kind of aspects of normative viewpoints, standpoints, but it falls into the map as we've been talking about. It falls into the same patterns as political elites in Ethiopia have been working along for decades, centuries. So, yeah, it is interesting to see.
So I understand the need to get closer to Abiy, for Getachew to do that. And I also, listening to you, I understand the need for the other faction to try to get closer to Isaias and to be friendly and to use diplomatic language and all that. I think all of that is understandable and tolerable. Where it becomes very difficult to understand for me is when by they I mean the Debretsion faction and the Getachew faction, go to yesterday to event that happened and try to pretend that Abiy and Isaias didn't do what everybody knows they had done. And I don't understand that. And for instance, they could follow was it Mandela who said, let bygones be bygones, when he came out of prison and when he realized that, litigating issues that happened in the past would lead to uncomfortable territories. He said, let bygones be bygones and let's just focus on what we can do together. And they could say that. Getachew could say that. Getachew could say, all right, a lot of things have happened. I'm not interested now in going to that. I'm more interested in what we could do together. And that way, it would be more honorable, it would be more respectable, and they wouldn't be engaging in erasing and belittling the genocide that happened in Tigray. That is what I don't understand, and I can't speak for everybody, but I think a lot of people don't understand that either. So I think that is the problem. I think people are ready to accept reluctantly that they should create those sorts of new friendships. It's all right, it's tolerable, but the way they are doing it is not something that is dignified, I suppose.
I can 100% relate to that and understand that, and my sympathies are there, obviously, with the victims of the atrocities warfare and their sentiments on it. And I believe you're correct in saying that, it is, what is in the terminology of transitional justice is called the peace or justice dilemma. If you're going to pursue justice, you will not have peace. If you're going to pursue peace, you need to forget justice. And that is a concrete, real dilemma in political transitions as this, after war. And it is the victor who decide what kind of justice should be meted. And the victors are still, are in Asmara and Addis. The loser, the defeated, is Tigray, is TPLF, TDF, call it whatever you want. You were defeated in the war, and you are not in any position to impose any kind of accountability or justice. So then the political elites, in order to continue to be relevant, they need to seek, those new alliances. And the capital they do have, the political capital they do have, is exactly to tone down who are to blame for the genocide, in order to sell them as a relevant partner to whoever they want. But again, they could have taken the stand, as you say, that, and I think partly they do somehow. They don't, Debretsion is still mentioning the genocidal war, he just don't attribute blame directly. And I think also Getachew is doing something on the same line in that regard. You have again an additional point here, obviously, and that is that also the Tigrayan leadership is responsible for war crimes inflicted upon Amhara and Afar populations, civilian populations. I'm not saying that genocide, but war crimes, certainly they are responsible for. And so they should also be on trial for the war crimes they committed in Amhara and Afar region. So it is kind of, giving each other impunity is always the best for the political elites. Because if you don't blame me, I don't blame you. We all go free and we can continue whatever business we do.
Yep. Well, I am alternating between an objective interviewer and some Eritrean who has been deeply involved and emotionally affected by the whole thing. And when I see some things, I feel humiliated sometimes. So, and you could see that. So
I fully understand that. I sympathize with that.
Excuse me for that. Yeah. But so that was from the point of view of the TPLF and from Isaias. But then we have the Ethiopian regime. And I think we could start with what happened yesterday. The former president, who many people believe is acting on behalf of the regime with the green light from Abiy, said that the international community should push for Eritrea to withdraw from Tigray. So an acknowledgement that Eritrea is occupying Tigray. And the reason, many people suspect, the reason the Ethiopian regime is doing that is not because out of genuine concern for Tigray, but because they are trying to create tension between Tigray and Eritrea because of the alliance that we just mentioned. How are you reading in terms of what the Ethiopian government has been saying? And you will have noticed they are also talking a lot about port, about the need to take Assad port by force or by peace. And when they see that, I think everybody understands that they mean by war. So tell us a little bit about your take on that.
Yeah, it is interesting. And of course, we all know that Eritrean troops have been inside Ethiopian territory, in Tigray, since November 2020, since the signing of the Pretoria Agreement. 2022. Yeah, November 2022. And many of us, international, myself included, but also Tigrayans, have called out to the international community, but certainly I have explicitly called out to the Ethiopian government. Why don't you protect your own citizens when you let Eritrean troops rape Tigrayan women still and abduct Tigrayan people and extort Tigrayans in northern Tigray? So others have been silent on this. Others have been silent on this until now. So then I agree with you. As an analyst, then we should think, since Addis Ababa have been silenced for 2.5 years on the fact that Eritrean troops are on Ethiopian territory in Tigray, why are they calling it out now? Why this time? And then you look at that bit of information and connect it to all the argument over the last year and a half on access to the sea, on that Ethiopian borders stop with the Red Sea, that Ethiopia has historical right to the Red Sea, that Ethiopia has always, historically for 2,000 years, has a port in the Red Sea, that all kind of narratives, all kind of explanations, some of them quite interesting, ethnographically. The use of the Afar, for instance, the connection that Afars are Ethiopians, Afars have the Red Sea, hence the Red Sea is Ethiopian. Revisiting the agreement, both the Algiers agreement, Ethiopian officials explicitly have stated that the Algiers agreement is nullified, and hence also going back to the 1993 referendum, saying that, that was conducted not properly. Since the Ethiopian constituency was not allowed to vote, we should question the referendum as a legitimate means to grant Eritrea independence in 1993. All these issues are raised again by either direct officials of the Ethiopian government or their proxies. So certainly it is, and you have a huge kind of social media campaigning on hashtag Red Sea, so to say, for Ethiopia. So it falls into a pattern. And then suddenly we have a semi-official statement arguing that Eritrean troops are occupying parts of Ethiopian territory and calls for international attention to this fact, suddenly, out of the blue. And then in international law, it wouldn't surprise me if a next argument would come up rather soon, saying that Ethiopia has the right to self-defense because Eritrea is occupying parts of Ethiopia, is hostile on Ethiopian territory. And that is correct. According to international law and the law of war, Ethiopia has the right to defend itself in this regard. And Ethiopia can construe a lot of arguments underpinning such a narrative. That Eritrea is amassing troops along the border, Eritrea is kidnapping Ethiopians, Eritrea is harassing Ethiopians, Eritrea is supporting Fano, is supporting other insurgencies in Ethiopia to destabilize Ethiopia. Eritrea is a threat to regional security, Eritrea is a threat to regional stability. Remember, it's not that many years ago Eritrea was sanctioned by the Security Council exactly on these grounds. So yes, Ethiopia can make a case on this. And then we need to try to interpret that. Why are you doing it? What is building up? How are they phrasing it? What is new now today, which was not around yesterday? And I think a plausible conclusion is rather clear, that it is a build-up to a new war. And I've said that for 2.5 years, since the signing of the Pretoria Agreement, I said this is just an interlude until a new war will erupt. Again, nothing new, nothing surprising in my view. It falls into this pattern we have seen since the signing of the Pretoria Agreement.
So I mean, this is something that is difficult to verify, but some people who support the TPLF and who support the idea of the TPLF and the APLF getting in bed together today, saying that Eritrean forces have actually withdrawn from Tigray, and the reason they have done is because they are trying to deny Ethiopia of any excuse. Is that something that you suspect might have happened? And of course, there is the issue of the bone of contention between Tigray and Ethiopia in terms of the territory. Is that Eritrea maintains that it is entitled to the land that was awarded to it by the border commission, what was it called, the Algiers border commission, and then of course Tigray said that it hasn't been demarcated and therefore that it should leave completely. So there is a lot of tension there.
It would be 100% wise of Eritrea to pull out its troops on what is recognized Ethiopian/Tigrayan territories. That would be definitely the wisest thing.
Kjetil, so I want you to also address the issue of when you say recognized, for instance.
Yeah, coming to that.
Oh, all right.
So, because, again, the Border Commission, Eritrean Ethiopian Border Commission, did grant in 2003 territories in Tigray, which the Tigrayan authorities since then have, and Ethiopian authorities under EPRDF, has not recognized. We are talking about Irob, basically, yeah? Half of the Irob community, Alintena and so on. But from my perspective, we know that Eritrean troops have also gone beyond the territories which was granted to them by the Border Commission. That is a provocation. That is illegal according to international law. Ethiopia has the rightful position to say that, we can push you out. And they can call for international sanctions on Eritrea because they occupy recognized Ethiopian territories. If Eritrea pulls back to only the territories granted to them by the Border Commission, which Tigrayan authorities doesn't recognize, which Ethiopia earlier didn't recognize, it is more ambiguous. Yeah, Eritrea has, it's not ambiguous according to international law. Eritrea has a right to be there because it is their territory. But then you have to think that, it is Ethiopian government over the last year and a half, or persons affiliated to the Ethiopian governments or their proxies, have claimed that the Algiers agreement is nullified. Hence, this border demarcation conducted by the Eritrean Ethiopian Border Commission in 2003 in a final decision is not valid. So then they should pull out to the earlier recognized international border between the two countries, which again is not demarcated on the ground as such. So it is a frontier which is somehow a bit ambiguous, at least at certain intervals along their international border. This, shouldn't be a big issue in its own right, but it can be used as an excellent trigger for a war. And that's what I've been trying to analyze over the last year or so. The war will come, for sure. But what will be the triggering factor unleashing the war? And from which side? And who will be involved in terms of Tigray? Which side will they align with? That is the interesting issue to look at. Not if the war will come or not. The war will come.
Well, something that I'm sensing is that the issue of demarcation is very difficult to implement if the actors are not acting in good faith, which they are not. So how would that be implemented? Even if we were to assume that they are not really interested in war, they're only trying to protect themselves, it's very difficult how they would find a settled arrangement without good faith. But
an interesting, just to speculate a bit, it's always interesting to provide some hypothesis. Since it is primarily TPLF who have denied the recognition, so to say, of the Border Commission's demarcation. If now suddenly TPLF in Tigray says that we recognize the demarcation as provided by the Border Commission, and then you have Debretsion and Isaias going out in a public statement inviting UN in to do the demarcation on the ground, as have been awaiting for, since 2003. Because Isaias' position has always been we don't need to negotiate anything, you just demarcate on the ground, because the border is clear on the map electronically. TPLF's position has been we need to negotiate where exactly on the ground it should be demarcated, so we don't cut across a village, or, you have to be a bit pragmatic. If no, either side gives in on their stand, or find a mutual common stand saying that, okay, we will be pragmatic or on this issue but not on that issue, but we call for a demarcation on the ground. That will be an interesting move forward in nullifying the contestedness of these borders between Asmara and Mekele. It will be a clear sign of an even stronger realignment. That's a bit puzzling, you might say, that a clear demarcation of the border will be a clearer indication of their realignment, but I think it will be. Because then that issue is off the table. They don't need to argue about that anymore, because this has primarily been an argument between Asmara and Mekele, not between Asmara and Addis, because these are Tigrayan borders we are talking about, not, Tigrayan heartland. It wouldn't surprise me if we suddenly get some kind of statements on that in the near future. We should be looking forward or look for that too. So, this, again, there are so many issues which are unresolved or which are ambiguous or which could be construed in different manners, which might be a triggering factor for a bigger conflict. Certainly Ethiopia is, again, as you said, suddenly taking up that card that Eritrean troops are on Ethiopian soil. They should go out. If not, we need to do something. If Eritrea annuls that, well, Ethiopia doesn't need to do anything because Eritrea is not on Ethiopian soil.
Another actor in all this is, of course, Fano, and you mentioned it earlier. And here I am going to speak without being fully informed. So there's a risk that what I'm about to say might not be true, but there are allegations that Isaias is giving them a training ground or staging ground in Eritrea. And in return, of course, Abiy has given some elements of Eritrean opposition, Brigade Nahamudu, they're called, and they have offices in Addis Ababa. And the sense you get is that each one of them is harboring opposition to the other. And of course, Fano is an opposition trying to topple Abiy in its own right. So how do you see all this dynamic?
Yeah, well, that's also a usual game they have been playing for the last 30 years, supporting each other's opposition, particularly Eritrea supporting armed opposition in Ethiopia. You have to remember that Isaias Afwerki have consistently and insistently worked to destabilize Ethiopia for the last 30 years, and he doesn't want a strong, coherent Ethiopia as such. And hence he paid millions of dollars to one of the cabinet members of Abiy's government today, Berhanu Nega and Ginbot 7, when they were based in Asmara. OLF was based in Eritrea. All the opposition forces were based, Ethiopian opposition forces were based in Eritrea until the coming of Abiy Ahmed. So that is a natural game Isaias have always played. And Ethiopia has also more on and off supported Eritrean opposition, mostly with local facilities and safe havens, not with arms at the level of Eritrea supporting Ethiopian opposition. But, and I agree with you, I don't have any material evidence to back the claim or accusation that Isaias is supporting the Fano. It is a lot of rumors, a lot of accusations, and someone claimed they do have the evidence. I'm sure that the US intelligence have it and other actors, but they have not disclosed it, if there are evidence. But there is at least a plausible scenario, to use that term, that he is supporting them through West Tigray and into Fano and into the Amhara regional state, as it falls into the pattern he has always worked on over the last 3 decades. That, again, a very, very significant move, which indicates the fallout between Addis and Asmara, is the fact that Addis Ababa has allowed and invited then Brigade Hamdou to establish offices both in Addis and in Semera, in Afar. I have to say I have close contact with the leadership of Brigade Hamdou. I follow them and I talk to them. Of course, their interest, again, is to topple the regime in Eritrea, to get a democratic transition in Eritrea. And what do they need to do? Well, they need to get on the ground, so to say, to try to push for change inside their home country. They cannot do that from Europe. They have done a good job in Europe and in the West, as you know, with demonstrations and pointing out the regime capacity of transnational suppression. But to really have an impact back home, they need to be in the region. And then they have accepted that invitation or whatever by the Ethiopian government to establish themselves in Ethiopia. Whether or not they will have the capacity or will get the resources and get the people to actually amount to a threat to the stability of Eritrea is a different matter. But symbolically, it is interesting at the stage we are in now. Again, a clear evidence for the fact that the fallout between Addis and Asmara, and that build up for something else, something new, a confrontation.
One thing we know for sure in terms of armed militia is that the Ethiopian regime is creating armed militia of Tigrans, and they are based in Afar. Now, there is no official communication that they are aligned with the Getachew faction of the TPLF, but that is the belief among many people. If you would like to reflect on that.
Yeah, I saw a video circulating a couple, 3, 4 weeks ago. When was it? When it was first kind of announced, the establishment of this militia, or whatever you call it. Of course, it falls into the same timeline as the expulsion of Getachew's fraction and the establishment of Getachew's new party, which Simret is now called. They left the liberal ideology and went to something else, which I don't really know what is.
What they interested on that, I don't know what his role is, but Kendeya, the former professor at Maqale University, you will know him from your connections. He said that, I mean, he didn't specify the ideology, but he said that the whole thing was supposed to address Western opposition that the TPLF used to get. What kind of opposition or criticism was the TPLF getting from the West? In general, you get the sense that they mean they are leftist tendencies, but apart from that, he didn't say anything.
No, I read his statement. Professor Kendeya is an old colleague and good contact. So it will be interesting to talk further with him and with Getachew on the ideological basis of the new party, obviously. But I don't have any evidence or information, as you say, on their connection to the armed Tigrayan resistance now being then established in Afar. And again, how strong they are, who is organizing. I saw that it was the son of old cadre, Bito Belay, who were kind of part of the leadership of that militia, which, harks back to the deep then split within the TPLF, if that kind of generational leadership is also defecting. But I don't have any evidence on the manpower or the staffing of that militia. And again, I think this is the last. Tigray really doesn't need a new guerrilla struggle on its soil. I must say that. I desperately hope that will not materialize.
And just one final point, Kjetil, and I will let you go. Everyone listening to us would get the sense that war and conflict is the game in town in Ethiopia and Eritrea. And if we had time, we could have expanded to Sudan and everywhere. And it begs the question, why? Why is it that war is the default setting? And one, I think, I might be wrong, but one explanation is because everybody knows they could get away with murder. There is no accountability. And that makes me wonder why the international community hasn't pushed for justice. More than 500,000 Tigrans were killed. And the idea that nobody has been held to account over this monstrosity is beyond belief. And that is what is breeding war. And it's very, very obvious to me that is what is happening. But you don't see that appreciation, that understanding among the international community. I don't even know who we are referring to when we say the international community. I mean, one of the things that I learned through the Tigray war is that it's not even a thing, the international community. But if you like to give us your reflections on the issue of justice and responsibility and accountability in Ethiopia and Eritrea, and with that we would wrap it up.
Yeah, that's a complex issue you're raising at the end here, and I don't have any concrete answers to it, but I agree with you. Part of the motivation for the relapse to continuous conflict and warfare in Ethiopia and that region is obviously the impunity of the elites who are commissioning the war. There has always been, again, since time immemorial and since the feudal structure were built on warfare, so to say, and the imperial order were built on coercion and war of conquests. And that has continued somehow into the fabric of political culture somehow. And it has always puzzled me, and I'm still puzzled by it, and I'm trying to write some more comprehensive stuff on it, in the sense of why political elites in Ethiopia have coercion and war and conflict as one of their first means in their political toolbox, as we usually say. And that's what initially attracted me to this region almost 40 years ago, in my first fieldwork in Eritrea in the early 90s, that war is such an acceptable means of political strategy, which is unthinkable in Scandinavia, where I come from.
And where I
in the
am.
political toolbox, we don't even have war or coercion at all, but your politicians grab to it in more or less the first strategy. And that's a complex, very, very complex and convoluted issue to tackle. I think part of it, but just small part of it, is the issue of impunity. Why the international community haven't acted on the atrocities which happened in Tigray, or acts on the atrocities which are happening in Amhara today, or in Oromia today. We're not acting on that either. There are dozens of civilian Amharas, children, mothers, who are killed by drone attacks today, as you experienced 2.5, 3 years ago. We don't act on that either. I'm not comparing, not numerically comparing, but, atrocities are happening in Ethiopia on a daily basis. We're not acting on it. The international community is, as you said, it's not a coherent entity. It's just a mirage of various actors, and they have overlapping interests and seldom manage to coordinate themselves. And you saw how easily Ethiopia managed to outmaneuver and to block any kind of initiatives of accountability, which was raised by the UN Human Rights Council, which was raised by EU, which was raised by other member states. They backed out one by one and dropped it. Even, the AU mechanism also dropped it finally. It's all about power. It's all about interest. It's all about short-term political gains from whoever. Also from the international community side. And then again, why should we bother? It's also there. We have our own problems to look at now, particularly in Europe with the war in Ukraine and attention to that and all that. And there are several layers trying to explain, and factors explaining why the international community failed to take action on accountability in the Tigray genocide. There are several reasons why the international community fails today to take actions on atrocities happening in Amhara, in Oromia, and elsewhere in Ethiopia. And it's depressing to see, but that's realpolitik.
Well, I put you on the spot with that, but you gave a perfectly lucid answer, Kjetil. I think that's one advantage of being a professor. You have your answers ready. But you say that you're writing a book to address that very question, and
don't hold your breath to wait for it.
Well, I was going to say I'm looking forward to reading it, but
Yeah,
you're spoiling.
I have a couple of 3 book manuscripts in my mind. I'm trying to gather data on, which I will finally write. Possibly when I'm retiring, I will get time to write it, if not before.
Oh, that would be wonderful. And I hope you're going to come on to that then and discuss it with us. But thank you very much for today.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Teklay.
It was my absolute pleasure. And thank you, everybody, for staying with us. That was Professor Kjetil Tronvoll. And that was that for today. Bye-bye.